Okay, well, stay with me, please, won't you, Akela? Because we're going to bring in right now Peter Baker, White House correspondent with the New York Times, and Michael McFaul, MS Now International Affairs analyst and former U.S. ambassador to Russia, both good friends of ours. So, Peter, Donald Trump is not letting this go. I mean, there's been quite the turn of events in this reflecting pool saga. Trump's handpicked U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro, ending the charade and stating on the record that damage was the result of flawed installation by the contractor, and combine it with the rush to complete that project before the America 250 events. So clearly from his Truth Social post just a short time ago, the president may not have known this was coming. Is he capable of being embarrassed by this? Will this embarrass him, or will he just pivot, you think, and continue saying, no, there's more to it?
Look, President Trump is not known for being embarrassed after being shown to have said things that are not true. He has said things that are not true so many times that our friends at the Washington Post counted them in the first term and came up with 30,000 examples of that. So, no, he doesn't seem to back off just because facts, reality, other sources indicate that something he has said is fiction. He just continues to push and push and push. And he has been successful in convincing at least a certain number of Americans of things that we know are not true, including, more important things like the result of the 2020 election. But once he's got something in his head, he genuinely and generally refuses to let go, no matter how, unproven, unfounded, unsubstantiated it might be. And he sticks to the narrative that suits what he wants to believe.
So, Ambassador, the FBI says that hackers targeted water systems in 7 states this week, and that includes Minnesota, where more than 30 facilities were breached. One U.S. official with knowledge of this matter told MS Now the Minnesota attack was probably the work of Iranian hackers, but the president shot down that theory. Here's a bit more of that.
We heard in Minnesota there was a cyber attack, and they blame it on Iran. I don't think so. I blame it on Minnesota because they're grossly incompetent. There was a cyber attack of 30 water plants, and I would blame it on Minnesota and the governor, the corrupt governor of Minnesota. They like to say, oh, it was Iran. Iran should be so lucky. Iran's got bigger problems than worrying about Minnesota.
Yeah, for sure. The governor of the state is going to definitely try to cyber attack his own water. Why stick up for Iran?
I think it goes back to what Peter was talking about. He just gets fixated on his own interpretation of facts. He wants to go after his political enemies. It's more convenient for him. And of course, he doesn't want to admit to the American people that maybe Iran is attacking us on our soil because of his failed military action against Iran. We would have no kinds of attacks like this if he didn't launch that attack. But I think reality is catching up to the president. Senator Booker just said he thinks he's Kim Jong-un, but he may think he's Kim Jong-un living in a totalitarian dictatorship. But he's the president of the United States of America, where we have reporters, including everybody on this program right now, except for me, keeping him honest. And he tries to act like he's an autocrat. And increasingly, it's just not working. And that's a good sign for democratic resilience here in the United States.
I don't know. You do a pretty good job of keeping everything pretty honest from the Trumpian perspective. But Akela, to you, because NBC News is citing 2 sources describing the president as being exasperated on Iran, saying he erupted at top national security officials during a recent meeting when they could not agree on strategy. What are you hearing about the president's level of frustration related to this, and how are White House insiders reacting to it?
Well, just yesterday at President Trump's cabinet meeting, he was asked whether he was willing to get back to the negotiating table with Iran, and he simply said that the U.S. wants to win. What we continue to hear is that the U.S. is exploring their military options. President Trump, though, has promised that the U.S. was going to overwhelm Iran with their military capabilities, but that simply has not been the case. And we've seen the administration talk about Iran's capabilities when it comes to missiles being obliterated, and that's just not true. We continue to see Iran strike U.S. military bases in the Middle East. And while the U.S. has been able to stop some of those and intercept some of those drones and missiles, we have seen casualties now of U.S. soldiers. And this war only continues to become more unpopular with the American public. And President Trump has to answer for the fact that he said this war would just last a few weeks. And now here we are 5 months into this conflict.
You know, Peter, to that point, a new poll shows Americans pretty much split on whether the U.S. should pause or completely stop military action against Iran or continue the war, with almost a quarter of Americans admitting they don't know enough. But here's what the president said yesterday.
How do you go about reviving the ceasefire and getting diplomacy back on?
Well, I think we just want to win. We just want to win. We're doing very well. They're being decimated. They have no Navy. They have no Air Force. They have no anti-aircraft. Doesn't mean they don't have any capability. They have some, but very little. We just want to win.
How do you interpret the president saying we just want to win? Does the president believe he has not yet won? And if Iran is already decimated, as he chronicled in that statement right there, what does winning look like to him?
He's told us time and time again over the last 5 months that we already have won, right? That the United States has already won this war. So that seems to be suggesting that maybe he understands that it hasn't and that there's still more to be done. Obviously, his strategy, such as there is, and it's not a particularly clear one at this point, is to keep the pressure on Iran and on the theory that at some point they will buckle and give in at the negotiating table. But that hasn't worked so far. We're 5 months in. Many thousands of bombs and missiles have been fired and done what they've done in Iran, created, no doubt, a great deal of destruction of their capabilities. And yet it has not changed Iran's calculation in terms of what it's willing to do, what it's willing to give up at the table. And there's no sense that more will have a different effect. That's the problem for President Trump at this point, is that he's sort of exhausted that version of a strategy, it looks like, without the result that he was hoping for.
Well, here's another angle to that problem, Ambassador, because this week bombing spread to a wider range of countries in the Middle East, with attacks reported in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Jordan, and then for the first time, Egypt. Do the president's latest remarks suggest an off-ramp is now on the back burner? And how do you envision this playing out if more countries get drawn into this war? Which ones might be expected to line up for versus against the United States?
Well, first, he has no definition of winning. Everybody should ask him every time he says that, what is your definition? To the best of my reading of what he says, he's actually just trying to open the Strait of Hormuz right now. And I want to remind everybody that strait was opened before he launched this war. All the other goals, eliminating the nuclear weapons program, eliminating missiles, ending terror support, liberating the Iranian people, he's not even talking about. That's the old agenda. He's not even talking about that. But now the Iranians have expanded the war, making it unpopular with a lot of our allies. It's getting worse the longer he keeps fighting. I think that's really important to understand. It's not just some kind of attrition rate. We're just going to fight and fight and fight. It's getting worse for our allies. And I fear that we're going to be even worse off if we keep fighting than if we just quit today. That's a question the president should be asked time and time again. What is your definition of winning? What is the end game? Because if it goes forever, I think it gets worse over time, not better for the American people and our friends and allies in the region.
And Peter, the Times reports the president is now dealing with a more determined Iran. And the article quotes two sources saying Joint Chiefs Chair General Dan Kane cautioned that major combat operations would dangerously deplete interceptor stockpiles. A new analysis estimates low altitude interceptors are down from 2,300 to under 830. High altitude interceptors are down from 252 to less than 280. Is anyone in the White House concerned Iran maybe strategically chipping away at these? And how low is the White House prepared to let these stockpiles go?
Yeah, there is concern at the White House about this, of course. And I think this is why you see, some of the pausing we've had. It hasn't been going on every single night, and it hasn't gone on at the intensity that we saw at the beginning of the war. And one reason might be that you're questioned about the law of diminishing returns. How much more of these these weapons can you use to achieve the goals you're trying to achieve? And particularly concerning, of course, are the defensive weapons that are, used by our allies in the region, the Gulf states and so forth, to defend themselves. And this has a cascading effect to where Ambassador McFaul used to be, of course, in terms of the ability to supply weapons to Europeans who are willing to buy them for the Ukrainians to defend themselves against Russia. So there is a wider impact here of what's going on.
Yeah, and Ambassador, speaking of Ukraine, Trump also says the U.S. has not yet agreed to allow Ukraine to make Patriot missiles after, though, saying at the NATO summit the U.S. would, in fact, give Ukraine Patriot licenses. Let's watch this.
We have not agreed to that. We're talking about it. But it's a hard thing to give away that kind of technology. We have the greatest weapons in the world. We have to be very careful about giving out the secrets to those weapons.
Look, no one's going to deny that last part there, but how do you interpret the conflicting positions on this?
I think it's absolutely crazy. I want to be blunt. He said the exact opposite 10 days ago. The exact opposite to lots of fanfare. The companies that make these interceptors then have been meeting with President Zelensky. And out of the blue, he says, oh, we're still thinking about it. And I just think this is a pattern with this president. He never can commit to a strategy. He's all over the place, just like we've been talking with Iran. And it makes the United States of America look weak. Not just in the Middle East, but in Europe, in Asia. It makes him look feckless. It makes him look like he can't commit to anything. And even over something we're not giving away the technology, just to be clear on that, would be to build them. And as Peter just pointed out, you just pointed out, there's a giant deficit of these interceptors around the world. It's in America's national interest to have more of them in Asia and Europe. But the main point is he just goes all over the place every single day. He can't commit to a strategy. So when we ask what's his strategy in Iran or Europe or Asia for that matter, we can't say because he changes his mind every single day, every single week. He literally just contradicted his own words from just a few days ago.